I'll never forget the terror of that camping trip. It was supposed to be a fun weekend with my two best friends, Mark and Ryan. We'd found a remote spot deep in the woods, perfect for a few days away from everything. But from the moment we arrived, something felt off. The first night, as we sat around the campfire, I noticed an old campsite nearby. It looked abandoned, yet recent, like someone had been there not too long ago. The remnants of a fire still smoldered, casting an eerie glow in the fading light. I shrugged it off, trying to enjoy the evening, but I couldn't shake the unease. As we settled into our tents, strange noises began to echo through the forest. Distant, guttural sounds that seemed too unnatural to be animals. Mark laughed it off, saying it was probably just the wind. But I could see the worry in his eyes, too. The next day, we decided to explore. The forest was dense, almost suffocating, with shadows that seemed to move just out of sight. We found symbols carved into trees, strange and unsettling. Ryan, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood, but even he fell silent when we stumbled upon a tattered, blood-stained piece of clothing. An argument broke out about whether we should leave, but in the end, we decided to stay. We were too proud, or maybe just too stupid, to turn back. That night, the noises grew louder. Footsteps crunched around our campsite, and shadowy figures seemed to dance just beyond the firelight. I took the first watch, gripping a flashlight and a makeshift spear we'd fashioned from a tree branch. My heart pounded with every rustle of leaves. Around midnight, I saw a figure watching us from the trees. I shone my flashlight, but it vanished, leaving only the swaying branches. I woke Mark and Ryan, but they saw nothing. They tried to reassure me, but their faces were pale with fear. The following morning, our food supplies were ransacked. We found deep footprints around our tents, larger than any humans. Panic set in. We decided to leave, but as we packed, we realized we'd been led in circles. No matter which direction we took, we ended up back at the same clearing. We split up to find a way out, each taking a different path. I wandered deeper into the forest, the trees closing in around me. That's when I saw him, a disheveled, wild-eyed man. He stepped out from behind a tree, blocking my path. His clothes were torn, and his face was twisted with anger and fear. "Leave," he growled. "This is my forest. You're not welcome here." I backed away slowly, my heart racing. The man advanced, his eyes burning with madness. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the scratches and cuts. I just needed to get away. I found Mark and Ryan near a stream. Mark was limping, caught in a snare trap earlier. We helped him up, moving as quickly as we could. The sense of being watched grew stronger, the forest alive with unseen eyes. As night fell, we set up a makeshift camp, too exhausted to keep moving. We took turns keeping watch, but sleep was impossible. Every sound, every rustle of leaves, made my skin crawl. I kept seeing the man's face, hearing his threatening words. In the dead of night, Ryan saw him again, standing at the edge of our camp. He screamed, waking us all. The man disappeared into the shadows, but we knew he was still there, lurking, waiting. We decided to make a run for it at first light. As we packed up, we found more messages carved into trees, warnings to leave. Our path was blocked by fallen trees and traps, but we pressed on, driven by sheer terror. Just when we thought we'd made it, the man appeared again, this time with a knife. He lunged at us, wild and desperate. We fought back, managing to knock him down and escape, but not before he slashed at Mark, leaving a deep gash on his arm. We finally found the trail leading out. The man's enraged screams echoed behind us, but we didn't look back. We reached our car and drove away, hearts pounding, fear gripping us. We made it back to town, swearing never to speak of what happened. But the memories linger, the nightmares haunt me. I still see his face, hear his voice. And sometimes, when I look into the woods, I swear I see him standing there, watching, waiting. That camping trip changed everything. We went looking for adventure, but found something far more sinister. And now, the forest will never be the same for us. I should have known something was wrong the moment my campfire went out on its own. The forest was pitch black, and the whispers were starting again. I thought I was just being paranoid, but the feeling of being watched was too strong to ignore. My name is Mark, and this is the story of the worst camping trip of my life. I decided to spend the weekend alone in a remote forest. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape from the chaos of daily life. I found a beautiful spot near a lake, set up my tent, and started a fire. The first night was quiet, except for those whispers. I told myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew something was off. The next day, I went hiking to clear my head. I stumbled upon some strange footprints, larger than any animal I knew of and too random to be human. As I walked further, I found an old, abandoned campsite. The tents were shredded, and belongings were scattered everywhere. It looked like whoever was there left in a hurry. I felt a chill run down my spine but convinced myself it was just a prank by other campers. That night, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. It felt like they were circling my tent, moving in closer. While gathering firewood, I saw a shadowy figure standing between the trees. I called out, but it vanished without a trace. My heart was pounding. As I tried to sleep, I heard a scraping sound coming from the direction of my car, like nails on a chalkboard. I barely slept that night. By the third day, I was on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder. I decided to cut my trip short, but when I tried to find my way back, I realized I was lost. I found a series of handmade wooden dolls hanging from the trees, leading back to my campsite. Each doll was crudely fashioned and eerily human-like. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. Someone had rifled through my belongings and carved a warning into a tree, "Leave now." That night, the whispers turned into footsteps circling my tent. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in total darkness. I felt something brush against my tent. Summoning all my courage, I stepped outside and saw multiple figures lurking just beyond the reach of my campfire's light. They were close enough for me to see their eyes reflecting the firelight, but not enough to make out their faces. I tried to make a run for it, but the path was blocked by more shadowy figures. I retreated back to my tent, heart pounding. The figures whispered my name, repeating it in a mocking tone. They knew personal details about me, things no one else could know. My anxiety peaked. I grabbed a makeshift torch and a hunting knife, ready to defend myself. But they were toying with me, appearing and disappearing in the shadows. I heard rustling in my backpack and found a note with the message, "We are always watching." At dawn, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. Inside, I found a map that helped me find my way back to the main trail. I was exhausted and terrified, but I finally made it back to my car. As I drove away, I vowed never to return. The haunting whispers still echoed in my mind, and when I arrived home, I noticed scratches on my car identical to the ones I heard in the woods. My nights were plagued by nightmares and the constant feeling of being watched. Back home, I tried to resume my normal life, but the memories of the figures and the whispers haunted me. One evening, while looking through the photos from my trip, I spotted a shadowy figure in the background of several shots. I confirmed my worst fear: I was never truly alone. The feeling of being watched never went away. Even in the safety of my home, I couldn't shake the terror of that weekend. The forest might be behind me, but the fear followed me, a constant reminder of the nightmare I'd barely escaped. So, if you ever think about going camping alone, think twice. The forest is not always as peaceful as it seems, and sometimes, the darkness holds secrets that are better left undiscovered. The moment I set foot in the forest, I felt it. A strange, prickling sensation at the back of my neck. The trees, their leaves a fiery orange and red, seemed to close in around me as I set up camp. I shrugged it off as my imagination. It was just the excitement of the hunt, I told myself. After all, I'd come out here to escape the noise of the city and immerse myself in nature. As night fell, I built a small fire and cooked my dinner. The crackling flames and the scent of burning which should have been comforting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest around me was eerily silent. Not a single bird call or rustle of an animal. It was as if the entire wilderness was holding its breath. I dismissed the unease and crawled into my tent. Sleep came fitfully, with every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves jolting me awake. At one point, I thought I heard heavy breathing just outside the tent, but when I shone my flashlight, there was nothing there. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into a restless sleep. Morning brought little relief. As I stepped out of the tent, I found large, unidentifiable footprints surrounding my campsite. They were too big to belong to any animal I knew. My heart pounded in my chest as I examined them, but I forced myself to remain calm. There had to be a logical explanation. Determined to focus on my hunt, I ventured deeper into the forest. The feeling of being watched only grew stronger. After hours of trekking, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned campsite. Torn tents and scattered belongings littered the area. It looked as if someone had left in a hurry, or been driven away. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, but I pressed on. When I returned to my camp, I was greeted with another unsettling discovery. My food supplies were missing. I searched the area, finding more of those strange footprints. My unease turned to fear. Something, or someone, was out there. That night, as I lay in my tent, I heard the breathing again. Closer this time, more deliberate. My grip tightened around my rifle. Suddenly, something scraped against the fabric of the tent. I froze, listening to the sound of whatever was outside trying to tear its way in. My heart raced as I fired my rifle into the darkness. The noise stopped, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps retreating into the forest. I knew I couldn't stay another night. At dawn, I packed my gear and started the long hike back to my truck. The forest seemed to close in on me, every shadow a potential threat. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The sense of dread grew with every step. As night fell, I lost my way. The dense forest disoriented me, and I realized I was being herded deeper into the woods. Panic set in as I stumbled through the underbrush. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and I heard faint whispers carried on the wind. My mind raced, questioning what was real and what was my imagination. I reached a cliff edge, seeing my truck in the distance but unable to find a way around. I turned to find the hermit standing behind me, a wild look in his eyes. He muttered incoherently, brandishing a crude weapon. We fought, a desperate struggle for survival. I managed to fend him off, but not without injury. Bleeding and exhausted, I stumbled through the forest, every step a battle against the pain. I encountered traps, snares that bit into my flesh, and pits that nearly swallowed me whole. Each encounter left me weaker, my resolve fading. The hermit's psychological warfare took its toll. I heard voices of past victims, saw their faces in the shadows. My sanity frayed as the forest closed in around me. In a final push, I reached my truck, only to find it sabotaged. My heart sank as I fumbled with the engine, every sound magnified in the stillness of the night. The hermit was close, his presence a constant threat. Finally, the engine roared to life, and I sped away, leaving the nightmare behind. I reported the incident to the authorities, but they found no trace of the hermit. Back home, the experience haunted me. I installed locks and security systems, but the sense of being watched never left. Nightmares plagued my sleep, and every noise made me jump. I withdrew from friends and family, the fear and paranoia isolating me. One night, I found a message carved into my front door, similar to those left by the hermit. The terror surged back, and I realized the nightmare might never truly be over. The forest, the hermit, and the fear would always be with me.